Good evening. It's Friday, January 10th, 2025, and this is the first regular episode of the Gem State Report. I did a preview episode in December, talked with former State Senator Steve Thane and current State Senator Tammy Nichols. Um, Today, a lot of the senators and representatives were headed home after the first week. They took off early on Friday, so going to go let them be with their families. I did record an interview a few hours ago with Senator Scott Grow of my district, 14, and I'll play that here shortly. So here we are after months and months of preparation, after all the campaigns, the primary election last May, the general election in November, leadership elections, committee selection, working on bills, getting everything ready to go. Here we are. The 105 lawmakers of the Idaho State Legislature gathered in Boise this week to begin the 68th legislative session. That's the 68th since statehood in 1890, when Idaho became a state under the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. By the way, Benjamin Harrison shares a distinction with our current president, Joe Biden, as he is sandwiched between the same predecessor and successor. Benjamin Harrison defeated Grover Cleveland in the 1888 election, but was then subsequently defeated by Cleveland in 1892. Grover Cleveland was the first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, while Donald Trump will become the second in just 10 days. 9 days now. So looking forward to that. But we're here to talk Idaho politics. The national scene it's big, it's loud, but it's out of our control. However, local politics is where you can really make a difference. Your city council, county commission, school board, state legislature, those are areas in which you can actually make a difference, and your vote does count. State Representative Julianne Young, who I felt was a strong conservative, especially on family values and social issues, she lost her race by 2 votes. I'm sure there are 3 people out in her district who are kicking themselves right now for not getting to the polls. So this is where you can make a difference, not only in voting, but also in holding your lawmakers accountable. They want to hear from you. Just yesterday, I was at the Capitol and I was talking to one of the new freshman legislators who told me that their inbox is full of people telling them not to repeal Medicaid expansion. That's the nature of government welfare programs. Once people are on it, once people are dependent on it, they don't want to let it go. And they're motivated to talk to their legislators to keep that program going, to keep that money flowing. So if you are interested in freedom, if you're interested in fiscal responsibility and conservatism, if you're interested in creating a society of people who are self-reliant rather than dependent on ever more government programs, then you have to be motivated too. So that's one of my goals with the Gem State Chronicle, is to provide you the news and analysis that will help you be a more engaged citizen. Your job as a citizen of a republic does not end on election day. It's just beginning. So, legislative session started this week. The governor gave his State of the State address. That's his basically his opening of the legislature. It's a bit of a tradition that goes back to Old England, where the king would open Parliament with a speech from the throne. We don't have thrones and we don't have kings, but we have chief executives. And those chief executives have agendas they want to see accomplished. The governor called his agenda the Keeping Promises Plan. He's been in office now for 6 years, and he's looking to probably stay in office. He hasn't officially announced if he's running next year for a 3rd term, but don't be surprised if he does. So his plan was all about exactly what he wants to keep doing. And basically what he wants to keep doing is spending tax dollars. He wants to invest more money in education, in infrastructure. He did set aside $50 million for what he called a school choice program. And that's interesting, and I'll get to that a little bit later in this program. If you go over to the Gem State Chronicle, let me load up my screen here. Is that the right one? No. Is that the right one? Yes. And there we go, flip it that way. So gemstatechronicle.com is the website. You can go there. That's where I post everything. If you haven't subscribed, the first time you reach the site, you'll see this little pop-up. You just put in your email. The only people that share that with is, well, with me, and I guess with Substack, although I don't think Substack sends you much spam. But that just goes there. It doesn't go to any political party or anything. Close that out, and if you close that out, it won't appear again for 30 days. That's the setting I set in there. So because I know how annoying pop-ups are. However, when I put that in there, my subscription rate went up. So people just they want to be invited to join things. So I invite you to join Gem State Chronicle. So you go there. On the left column are all my articles this week. I recapped day 1 of the session last Monday. Looked at the layout for school choice, talked about Idaho Signal. That's a new program, or it's actually the second year of the program. It's sponsored by Citizens Alliance of Idaho, and that comes on every day at 11:30 p.m. I'm proud to be a contributing editor to that program this year. I come on every day for about 10 minutes, maybe a little longer, and talk about what's going on behind the scenes, as well as writing articles for the Citizens Alliance X account, Twitter account. Yesterday, I talked about Medicaid expansion. Like I said, our legislators are hearing from people who want this program to keep going. So if you want to offer a contrary view, then you need to let them know as well. And then today, I just kind of looked back at the last week and previewed the show that we're having today. One thing I want to show you, session snapshot. So there's all these tools at the top of the Gem State Chronicle. One of them is session snapshot. And this is something I started last year. I've changed it up a little bit this year. And this I'm going to write down all the bills that I think are interesting. So it's really just my own personal evaluation. But if you think I'm missing something, please let me know. editor@gemstatechronicle.com. Send it over. So far I have 2. Both of these were sponsored by Representative Bruce Skog. And you click on it, and it'll show you just a bit of information, a link to the bill. So you open that up, and it'll go to the actual legislative bill page, which has the bill text, the statement of purpose, fiscal note, co-sponsors. By the way, if you want to know what all of these things are, instead of listening to me, you can go to Idaho Freedom Foundation. They had Capital Clarity yesterday where they did Legislature 101. Nicholas Kleinworth explained exactly what all these things are, how to read a bill, how to read the legislative website, and also how to become involved in the process. So it's good information. Speaking of IFF, though, I also put their analysis of the bill. This one they've already rated. It's +1, which that's good. This bill, by the way, would raise the threshold for how many votes it takes. See, IFF does it too. How many votes, how much of percentage of the vote it would take to make an initiative into law. Right now, it's 50% +1, a bare majority. Had 50% of Idahoans +1 voted to implement ranked choice voting, it would be the law of the land, and we'd be sitting here trying to figure out what to do about that now. Fortunately, the voters of Idaho defeated that 70-30. However, Representative Skog thinks that we need to raise that threshold. He says that outside groups are essentially perverting the idea of the Citizens Initiative, because the whole point of the initiative, like so much of our Constitution, here, let me bring it back to me. Like so much of our Constitution, the Idaho Constitution, that is, it comes from the Progressive era, and this is something where it helps to study history. The current breakdown of Republicans as conservatives and Democrats as liberals, that's really been the dichotomy since the 1930s. Before that, however, there were differences. There were conservative Democrats, there were progressive Republicans, and the ideas that they were debating were different from the ones we debate today. So during the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had this thing called the Progressive Era, where even Republicans like Theodore Roosevelt thought that you could use government to make a better society. Now today, most Republicans, or I'd say a good portion of Republicans, are very skeptical of that idea. We've seen what it looks like when government gets involved in society, and it's not usually good. However, back then, consider that a lot of the things that they implemented, we take for granted now. Labels on food. I don't have any boxes of food around, but if I did, I'd show you. You look in the back, it's the nutrition information. It tells you the breakdown of calories and carbohydrates and protein. It tells you what the ingredients are. They didn't have that back then. And this was right when processed foods were starting to become a thing, and people had no idea what was there in their food. So the government said, well, you have to put the ingredients on the label. And I don't know many people who would not want that now. So a lot of the things that the progressives did were not necessarily bad. It's just we've become used to them now. We take them for granted. But it was during this era that our Constitution was written. 1890, we became a state, and a lot of the early ideas were implemented into it during that time, such as public education. That was a progressive idea. The idea was that you didn't want, especially poor students, because obviously rich families could send their children to any school. A tutor, for example. C.S. Lewis, in his autobiography, talks about being sent away to a private tutor who taught him before he went off to boarding school. So there's always been that. But the progressives were concerned that poor families, their children were not going to be able to get an education. So they wanted a system of free public schools. And so they put that in our Constitution and said the legislature is required to fund and maintain a uniform and free system of public schools. Why? Well, because it says they want to maintain our Republican system of government. Those same progressives back then believed that if they didn't educate the next generation, then the entire system would fall apart, because a Republican system of government where we elect representatives and then hold them accountable, it requires people who are engaged and understand the matters at hand. So that was some of their impetus for the public schools. There were also immigrant children coming in that they wanted to make sure became Americans. There were children coming in from perhaps other religions that they wanted to kind of adopt America's Protestant character. In fact, the Blaine Amendment, there was a fellow back in the late 1800s named James Blaine. He was a powerful representative. He was a candidate for president. He wanted an amendment in the U.S. Constitution saying that no public money could ever go to parochial schools. Catholics and Jewish communities had set up their own schools because our public schools that were being created during this progressive era were very Protestant in character, because that was what America was at the time. So Catholics and Jews decided they didn't want their children to become Protestant Americans, so they set up their own school systems. Well, that got people worried that, well, they're going to be taking public money, so they put in these rules. He didn't get it in the U.S. Constitution, but he made sure it was put in a lot of state constitutions at the time, including Idaho's. So we have an amendment in our Constitution that says that any public money cannot go to religious institutions. Now, in other states, that's already been struck down. And it's become an issue here in Idaho. They had a proposal last year to repeal the Blaine Amendment. To change our Constitution requires a vote of the people after a 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate. So it's a high hurdle, and it didn't get through last year. So there's going to continue to be debate on that. We're already breaking that rule. The launch grant provides students with their $8,000 scholarships that they can take to schools that are religious in character, such as BYU Idaho. That's a Mormon school. The Blaine Amendment's basically dead. But anyway, that was one of the things that was happening back then. They wanted these public schools to create good American Protestants. And obviously the Protestant character of our schools is slightly less today. They're more secular humanist, but that's still in our Constitution. So our legislature is still constitutionally required to have a uniform public school system. There's a lot of things in our Constitution that stem from the progressive era. And to circle back around to where I started, one of those things is the where did my screen go? There it is. One of those things is the initiative. They felt that, it's good to have a legislature. It's good to have representatives who are elected by the people to make laws on our behalf. Remember, the legislative branch of government, their purpose is to make laws. Legis, Latin for law. On the other hand, you have the executive branch to execute, to carry out. The purpose of the governor is to carry out the laws that the legislature makes. A lot of times we complain about what the executive branch does. Well, oftentimes they're just taking a mandate given to them by the legislature and running with it. That's one of the things hopefully we're going to see in the legislature this year. They're going to try and bring some of that back. However, the progressives believed that even with a Republican legislature, Republican small r, representative, that there were still going to be cases where we needed the people to exercise lawmaking power completely on their own. The Idaho Constitution says, here, let me find it. Constitution of the State of Idaho, preamble, Article 1. Yeah, there we go. Article 1, Section 2, Idaho Constitution. All political power is inherent in the people. So, pursuant to that, the writers of our Constitution created the initiative process. Says that if we get enough signatures on a petition, we can create a question to put on the ballot, and if the people vote, a majority of the people vote for that question, then it becomes the law. That's how we have Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion was a federal program that states had to opt into. The legislature had no intention of opting in because they knew, I think most of them knew, it was going to be a budget buster. It was going to cost billions of dollars to give health care benefits to able-bodied working age adults. Why would we want to do that? Well, Reclaim Idaho comes in and does an initiative to that effect with a lot of outside money and help, in which they convince the people of Idaho that it's not going to be a big deal. It's basically free money from the federal government. And look at all these poor people who need our help. And they passed it, more than 60%. So it became the law of the land. And now we're dealing with it with more than $1 billion going to that program out of our tax dollars. That's not to mention the federal tax dollars, which are borrowed from our great-grandchildren. So anyway, all that said, Representative Skog has a bill here that would raise the threshold from 50% plus 1 to 60%, which means in order for an initiative to become the law, it would have to get 60% of the vote. And other states have similar ideas. I believe Colorado was mentioned as a state that has a 55% threshold, and Colorado is a blue state, so you can debate about how progressive it is. So anyway, long story short, that's one of the two bills I have up here. The other one is the authority of the Attorney General, also sponsored by Representative Skog. The Attorney General's office already has the ability to investigate criminal claims against city officials, mayors, council members. However, there's a loophole in the law where he doesn't have the authority to investigate county officials, and this would just close that loophole. Representative Skog said that this same bill passed last year, passed the House, but it lost in the Senate by a tie vote. And he said during his testimony that he's not sure why. Well, he's going to try again. So that is there. I will keep, as each of these things goes through the process, first it has to be printed and then go to a committee and then the floor and then the other side of the chamber, the other side of the rotunda, to their committee and their floor and then to the governor. I'll keep you updated. So you can always check and see what the status of a bill is here. And there will be a lot more on this list once we get going. Right now, these are the only two that are really super interesting. Obviously, there's a couple more. You can always go to the legislative website and see the whole list, but that's not going to have my insightful commentary. So that's what's going on there. Remember, you can also go to Idaho Insider. This will take you and bring you information about the various people who run our government. You go to the executive branch. You've got our 7 executive officials: the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, controller, state treasurer, attorney general, and state superintendent of public instruction. And each one of these pages, I'm not quite done with it, but each one is going to have information about that person and that office. I've done a little bit of work on the governor's page. This is, his authority, history, links to things, and this is very cool. You can see all the news all the articles I've written that mention the governor. And obviously he's an important figure, so I mentioned him a lot. But then you go back, and even more interesting is the legislative branch of government. So I have a profile page for each of our representatives. I mentioned Representative Skog earlier, so I'll use him as an example. There you go. I still need to rearrange his. His is one of the older ones that, as I was going through the 105 legislators, I changed the layout a little bit. So I have to go back and fix the earlier ones. But this still has the basics. You can see the scorecards from the various organizations. News. Obviously, these two articles on the top are the session snapshots for those two bills, since he introduced them. The committees he's on, what term he's in. So just interesting information. I've also got his official email. So this will email his legislative email account. And if I can find a personal email for a legislator, if it's published online somewhere, I put it in here. Sometimes they'll put it on their campaign sites or their Facebook pages. If I just happen to know somebody's from private correspondence, I'm not going to publish that. Okay. Oh, I forgot to delete this stuff. So, and then down here you have a map of his district. District 10 consists mostly of looks like North Nampa, bit of Star over here, Middleton, and some of the rural areas. So yeah, that's the Idaho Insider. Let's close that. Hope you're all having a good Friday. It's almost the weekend. We'll be back in action next week. So Earlier today, I had the opportunity to chat with Senator Scott Grow. He is my senator from District 14. He's also the co-chair of the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. That committee, JFAC, is the budget-making committee for the legislature. And constitutionally, the legislature just has one job every year, and that's to pass a balanced budget. They have to take in the money they expect to get from taxes, the money that they need to operate the government, make them match. And beyond that, there's no constitutional mandate for them to pass laws or do anything else. So really, the budget writing process is the most important part of the session. And JFAC is the committee that handles that. There's 10 members from the House and 10 members from the Senate. The House Appropriations Committee is chaired by Representative Wendy Horman. The Senate Finance Committee is chaired by Senator Grow. So that's the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. They will go through all the budgets and start sending them to the floors for votes. And once the budgets, each budget for each agency is its own bill that has to be voted on in the House and the Senate. And then once they pass both, it goes to the governor for his signature. So there's 3 spots where a budget can be examined. First is in JFAC itself, as they debate the budget. A lot of times what they'll do, the members on JFAC will go examine each line item on the budget and say, do you really need this? Do you really need this extra employee? We see you haven't filled these 3 spots, these 3 vacancies in your office. Why do you need another? And they work on that, and then eventually they'll vote on that. And then it goes to each floor, so there's a chance for members of the House and members of the Senate who are not on JFAC to also weigh in. Last year, JFAC passed a budget for welfare, the Division of Welfare, that contained a new program called Summer EBT. Because we already have the free and reduced school lunch program, where federal money goes to school children whose families fall below a certain threshold, and that feeds them, that pays for their school lunch. Well, when COVID happened and schools were closed, the federal government worried, well, how are these children going to eat? So they started sending them EBT cards. And now they have this plan to continue doing that into the summer. And not only was it going to be into the summer, it was going to include families who maybe didn't even need it, but they happened to go to a school that had a certain threshold of free and reduced lunch students. So it's basically expanding this welfare program further and further and further. And it was in part of this budget. But the Senate, once it got to the Senate floor, the Senate voted it down. They defeated it. Senator Ben Adams actually made a good argument that this is essentially turning into Soviet-era ration cards. And so they defeated it, went back to JFAC. JFAC stripped out the summer EBT program. Even though it was all federal money, they were worried, as I was, that this was a new welfare program. And the Democrats and their friends in the media complained, saying Republicans wanted, poor children to starve, because that's what they always say. But the Senate passed the new budget without that program. And that's how the process should work. If something is missed in JFAC, well, it should be caught on the floor. So there's always opportunities for you to call your legislators, call your representatives, call your senators, even if they're not on JFAC, if you're worried about some budget line item. Of course, if you're worried about a budget line item, then you are paying a lot of attention to the process. Anyway, all that to say, I spoke with Senator Grow, and he shared his what he's been doing on JFAC and what we can expect. So let me play that interview for you. Senator, thank you for taking the time tonight.
Happy to be with you. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the opportunity.
Happy to be with you. Thank you, Brian.
JFAC, Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. First week, seems like all the other committees were taking their time to get started. You were jumping straight into the work. What can you tell us about what happened at JFAC this week?
Well, I appreciate that. It's been, as you say, JFAC is the only committee that goes 3 hours a day, every day of the week. That's our dedicated time, plus the other time that we're working on it with analysts and information from different departments and agencies. So we have twofold responsibility as far as the revenue and the expense. So we've had what we call the Economic Outlook Committee that's been going the last couple of days, and looking at the governor's recommendation, what he thinks the revenues would be, and then also listening to economists and different experts, universities, associated taxpayers, and others, giving us a recommendation on what the revenue projection ought to be for both fiscal 25 and fiscal 26 right now that we're working on. So we will be making a determination within the next few days as a committee to give our best judgment as to what we think the revenue number should be. So that's one thing. Also, today, for example, we've received a report from one of the subcommittees, which is the Committee on Compensation for the State Employees. And their recommendation is a little different from what the governor had recommended, but we're anxious to get that number and incorporate that into what we call our maintenance budgets. Without getting a lot of detail, we just say that our maintenance budgets, if you think of it this way, what happened last year that was ongoing, not new things they wanted, that kind of thing, but whatever's in the base budget. And the House voted on that base budget, the Senate did, and the governor signed it. So that is the base. They keep the lights on kind of thing. And then we make a couple of adjustments to that, one of which is the compensation. The employees there don't, they expect some kind of increase, particularly with the inflation we've had. So we'll be adding a number for the inflation for wages. We also have contract inflation, for example, rental agreements that have to be adhered to legally. So we'll make an adjustment for that. We have benefit costs, insurance that has to be covered. And then we have what we call SWICAP, which is an odd term, but we have agencies like the Controller's Office, I'll use that one. They work for all the different agencies and departments. And so they charge those departments, kind of like a CPA firm. They send out a charge to those different agencies and departments based on the number of employees that they have and the amount of work that the Controller's Office has. So we'll be making those adjustments to last year, and that will form what we call our program maintenance budget. And we will vote on those, hopefully this next Friday, and get those for all of the agencies and departments. That will be the base. And then we really dig into our work and start looking at the current requests from the different departments and agencies. So a week from Monday, no, I guess it's actually next Monday, we will begin to hear from some of the agencies and departments. One of the changes that we did this year, last year actually, and continuing this year, is that previously we'd have a 3-hour, we would call it a dog and pony show, where they would come in and show us pictures of kids in school or whatever and tell us the wonderful things they're doing. We changed all of that and cut the 3-hour time frame down to an hour and a half. So they have an hour and a half to focus on the current year's budget request. So we're really homing in. By getting those maintenance budgets out of the way, we are really homing in on the current year's requests. And so we'll have our analysts make a presentation on behalf of the agency. And then the committee itself will be able to ask questions and make a determination. Ultimately, a week later, we will set a budget for that department or agency. So another thing we're doing is moving up the budget setting. In the past, I remember when I started, several years ago, we would hear these people go on for 6 weeks, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 weeks, and then start setting budgets. And I asked the co-chairman at that time, I said, am I supposed to remember everything that I heard 6 weeks ago? And he said, yes. I said, well, that's ridiculous because there's just too much data. You're talking about billions of dollars. So this way, we're going to listen to it, and a week later, we're going to set a budget. And so that'll be fresh in JFAC's mind. Plus, that'll get it to the House and the Senate on a more timely basis. So they will have an opportunity to actually deal with it throughout the session. Instead of historically, it's been the last 2 or 3 weeks, billions of dollars are put before the Senate and the House to try to make a decision. And that just hasn't been the most effective way to do it. So we're going to let them work on it all year. They'll be able to ask questions and be much better informed as they vote on these bills.
Now that sounds like an improvement. It seems like in the past, the budget bills would come up at the very end and everybody just wants to pass it and get out because
they just want to go home. You got it.
You mentioned the revenue forecasts. How on earth do you guess or predict what the revenue is going to be? It seems like you have to take into a lot of things into account.
We certainly do, Brian. So we listen to these economists and bankers and universities and the tax commission and everybody that has to deal with this. And they make their best guesses, which is all they are. And then we listen to all of that and then try to come to a number that we feel is appropriate based on what we have heard. So it is projecting out. We're really focused on the next 18 months. So we have a task of determining what we think the revenues are going to be up to 18 months from now. And that is tough because we've got, with President Trump, we've got the tariffs that are coming. Idaho could be affected, our ag could be affected by those tariffs. And so that could be a revenue adjustment. We've got inflation that we have to deal with. We have the Trump tax law that has to be put in place again and possibly some changes there. So there's a lot of uncertainty that we're dealing with, but it's our best projection. Now, one nice thing is 12 months from now, we have the opportunity to fine tune that because we'll have more information. So that's what we're doing right now with the fiscal 25 budget that ends in June 30 this year. We made a projection 12 months ago, best guess. Now we can see it's coming in a little better than we had projected. And so we can adjust that revenue. So we're actually redoing the 25 that we did 12 months ago now. And we're doing the 26, 18 months out in advance. And then we'll look at that again in 12 months.
So a lot of numbers for sure. Fred Birnbaum, IFF, wrote something interesting recently, suggesting that with one-time expenditures, especially from the federal government winding down, that you could still increase ongoing expenditures a little bit, but still cut overall spending. What are the chances that we can actually see some cuts in government spending this year?
Great question. Yes, there will be some decrease in the federal monies, but a lot of that's already been taken into account. So there's not as much decrease as you might be suspecting at this point. With the maintenance budgets, that's going to be about a 3% increase over last year, just because of well, think about it. If you increase salaries 3%, then that's the biggest expense that we deal with. So you're looking at some kind of 3% increase just with the maintenance budgets. And then they always come in with their new requests, new things that they want. And that's where we try to, well, the other thing we deal with, Medicaid is a toughie because we have federal requirements, things that we have to do. And then the Idaho economy has been so good recently that the feds keep increasing the percentage that Idaho has to pay for Medicaid. Now think about that. So for every 1%, right now the feds, I'll just take it simply, feds pay 70% of the regular Medicaid and we pay 30. And they are decreasing their match from 70, then it went down to 68 and 67. So every one of those 1% drops costs us about $50 million. And so when we're trying to decrease the budget and we still have to pay those Medicaid charges that the feds impose upon us, right there, you get another 50 million increase. So it's tough to decrease when we have these federal mandates telling us what to do.
Yeah, that federal money, it's almost like a drug. You know, they get you hooked on it and they make you pay.
It's terrible. You're right.
Well, we're coming up on the end of your time. I want to be respectful of your time.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to add?
I'll just say, yeah, we have half of the members of the committee are new this year. So we're also, this last week, we've been doing a lot of training. It's like drinking out, not just a fire hose, but like a whole tunnel full of water coming at them, because it is very complex when you're dealing with billions and billions of dollars, more than 100 agencies and departments, all kinds of requests that people want. And then the whole mechanics of how do we present these as bills, because we'll present over 100 bills to the House and the Senate. So this week's been primarily trying to get those folks up to speed.
All right, well, try to get some rest this weekend, and it's back to work on Monday.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks
Thank you,
for the
Senator.
opportunity to talk to you. Okay, bye-bye.
Mute myself there. Appreciate Senator Groh taking the time earlier today. Like I said, it's the first Friday evening of the session. A lot of the legislators who came from outside the Treasure Valley were taking off early so that they could get home, spend time with their families, even the ones here in the Treasure Valley. Obviously, JFAC is a ton of work. One thing I wanted to mention, Senator Groh mentioned the proportion of money that the federal government spends on things like Medicaid. That was one of the selling points of Medicaid, that the federal government would pay a lion's share of the money. For regular Medicaid, I believe it's 70%, but the senator said it's going to be going down because we're just doing so darn well. And for Medicaid expansion, I believe it's 90%, but that could change in the future as well. But anyway, that's called FMAP. I'm not actually sure what it stands for. The senator would know, but in case you ever hear people talking about that, that's what they're referring to. So that is JFAC. That's what's going on there. Wanted to cover a few more things while I was here. I mentioned school choice earlier. So I did put up an article a couple of days ago talking about what school choice looks like. So there's actually one bill that's been introduced, House Bill 1 by Representative Clint Hostetler. It's a tax credit of $9,500 per student that is not in a public school. And this program is capped at $250 million. So that's how much money it could spend before they stopped handing out those tax credits. And do the math there, that's about 26,000 students that could be helped. And the number I saw of students that are outside the public school system is estimated to be around 35,000. So a good portion of it would be able to take advantage of that tax credit under that program. Unfortunately, Representative Hostetler introduced it as a personal bill, which, if you don't know, a personal bill is when they bypass the committee process. They simply enroll the bill, or not enroll, that's a specific term. They introduce the bill, but it's under their own name. And in the past, personal bills had a chance of being heard because generally they go to the Ways and Means Committee, or they just sit at the desk of the Speaker or the Senate President and don't go anywhere. In the past, they had a chance of passing. They could go through a committee and be heard on the floor. The last few years, that's not the case. Personal bills they're essentially statement bills. They're a legislator coming out and saying, here's what I want to see. Here's the kind of bill I would run if I could, is basically what it is. The regular bill process is that it has to be presented to a committee that votes to print it. And from that point on, the bill belongs to the committee. And so it becomes the committee's bill. So when you see, say, House Bill 2, talking about the statewide initiative vote threshold, Representative Skog gave that bill to the House State Affairs Committee. So now that bill is no longer his. It belongs to the State Affairs Committee. He will present it on the floor once it gets there, but that's how the process works. So you have personal bills and regular bills. Anyway, Representative Hostetler's bill is a personal bill, so it's not likely to be heard. However, it does kind of set the mark for what conservatives are looking for with school choice. $9,500, that's about what students are on average. That's about the average amount of money that the state spends on students in Idaho. I think it's actually $8,500, but then there's other money that, if you count the local stuff and federal stuff, put it all together. Now, there was one interesting pushback to that from Scott Herndon. I wanted to share that. I've got an image here to share on Twitter. He brought this up. There we go. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's right there. So he wrote, Idaho Representative Clint Hostetler filed a bill, $9,500 new tax credit for private school expenses. How is this not taxpayers subsidizing private school? Now, obviously, I believe back in the Senate in 2023, Scott Herndon supported Senate Bill 1038, which was an ESA, an education savings account that would allow parents of private school students, homeschool students, micro school students, whatever, non-traditional schooling options, to gain reimbursement for expenses, whether it's tuition to a private school or textbooks for a homeschooling family. That bill was defeated on the Senate floor. There's a lot of chatter among activists and legislators that an ESA is just not feasible in Idaho right now. What was interesting is that the Mountain States Policy Center had a school choice forum on Monday morning, and a lot of the legislators were there in attendance watching. And they brought in Doug Ducey, the former governor of Arizona. Now, Arizona famously has a robust school choice system, including ESAs and tax credits. Basically, parents can use any form imaginable to make sure the money that would otherwise go to the public school would go follow their child to whatever educational system they choose to use. However, it sounds like a tax credit is what people are settling on this year. So Herndon goes on. He says, how is this better than Idaho launch, another massive government subsidy of $85 million? This would be new taxpayer-funded subsidy of $250 million, and growth in Idaho's government spending. And he's right about that. It's a new program, because every time people bring up school choice, the public school defenders, the teachers unions, the administrators, they always come out and say, we don't want any money being taken from the public school system. They like having that money there, and they fear that if that money is taken away, then the schools and students will suffer. So what these school choice programs usually do is they create a new pot of money. And that's what he's talking about here. I replied to him, taxpayers are already subsidizing public schools, so which is technically true. Anyway, and he responds to my statement there. You can read it. You can go on to find Herndon for Idaho on X and read the whole conversation. I thought it was an interesting perspective to bring up as we continue to debate this issue. It sounds like the bill that has the most consensus right now is one that was presented or was hinted at by Representative Wendy Horman. She, along with Senator Lori Den Hartog, presented a bill last year that would be a tax credit that was killed in the House Revenue and Tax Committee. However, a lot of the members of that committee are gone. School choice was actually a big issue in the primary campaign, with people like Representative Greg Lanting and Representative Chanel Dixon and Representative Melissa Durant. They were defeated by conservative challengers who supported school choice. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Representative Horman's bill, she hinted at, it hasn't been officially introduced, but she gave the basics on Monday morning. It would be a $5,000 tax credit. And the program would be capped at $50 million. Special needs students could get up to $7,500. So it would be a maximum of 10,000 students. And they would prioritize based on families that are under 300% of the federal poverty line. So it would be triaging, essentially, giving the tax credit first to the less wealthy families. The governor mentioned it during his State of the State. He also called for $50 million for school choice, but he said he wants to see accountability, and that's the sticking point. That's the point I keep coming back to. I think if we wanted a school choice program, it would be fine if it was less than what we wanted. Because once it's in place, families start using it, they'll see that, hey, this is a great thing. I can take the tax money that would otherwise be going to a public school. Obviously, it's new monies, but same idea. I could take this tax money and go to a private school or a micro school or a homeschool, whatever, and they'll find out that it's working out for them. I think. I think it would be really a great thing for a lot of families, and there will be political pressure to expand it to more families and maybe raise that tax credit higher. $5,000 is, seems like a lot, but for private school tuition, it's iffy. So, however, if there's some sort of sideboards or accountability like the governor's talking about, then I think it's a non-starter, because that would be government intrusion. And that's exactly what a lot of people are worried about. There's a reason people want to get out of the public school system. There's a reason they want to try these alternatives. If teacher certification and strict curricula and standardized tests were enough to ensure student success, then our public school system would be doing great and nobody would want to leave. But those things are not enough. There's something missing. So trying to take that structure, that accountability, and put it on this private system, even though it is public money, that's just going to be taking the same structure of a failing system and putting it on the system that's supposed to be the alternative. And if the bill has that, then I'm not going to be supporting it, and I know a lot of other conservatives won't as well. So that's school choice here right now. One more thing I wanted to cover. We're coming up on the hour. Is women's sports, women's volleyball. So, as you might know, the battle over women's sports has been going on for a long time, and I will give Governor Brad Little credit. He signed the Defending Women's Sports Act a couple of years ago. He was one of the first governors in the nation to sign a bill like that, saying that if you are biologically male, you cannot play on the girls' team. And it seems reasonable. It seems like the sort of thing you go back even just 30 years, and people would think it's weird that we need laws to say that. However, it is what it is. Representative Barbara Ehart has been on the front lines of this. She was a former Division I basketball player and coach. She's experienced, athletics. She knows what it's like, and she knows how much it means to young people to be able to play, especially young women. You know, it's one of those things where men and women are different. Boys and girls are different. On average, boys are stronger, men are stronger, faster, quicker, and that's why we have segregated sports. Men aren't worried about women coming in and taking their spots on teams. If you have a college football team with a limited number of scholarships, you're competing with the other young men for those spots, but you're not going to worry about a woman coming in and taking it. There's been a few women who have tried kicking in college football. Even that really hasn't worked out yet. But there's nothing actually stopping women from playing men's sports because of that, because there's no need to. However, if men were allowed to play women's sports and enough men had the, complete lack of dignity to do it, they would dominate. And we're seeing that. During a testimony on Thursday morning, Representative Ehart presented a resolution honoring the Boise State women's volleyball team that refused to play 3 times. They refused to play against the San Jose State team that had a male athlete who identifies as female. The first 2 times were during the regular season in the Mountain West Conference. The third time was in the Mountain West tournament, which meant by forfeiting, they ended their playoff run. That was their road to a championship, and they forfeited. They were willing to do that. And Representative Ehart wanted to make sure they were honored for that. In fact, she said on the Idaho Signal program the other day that she was actually instrumental in urging them to take a stand on that. And I think that's the deal. A lot of us, who have been watching this issue for many years have been saying that, it's all well and good for those of us on the outside to be complaining about this, to be complaining that Riley Gaines had to swim against a male swimmer. But until the female athletes themselves, until the young women themselves start standing up, nothing's going to change, because why would it? So, seeing them stand up and give up not only 3 games, but a chance at a championship was great and inspiring. And they should be awarded for that, rewarded. We should have positive reinforcement for that, because that's exactly what we want to see. And so Representative Ehart has this resolution that calls on the legislature to not only honor the team, but also calls to the carpet the NCAA and the Mountain West Conference for allowing this in the first place, for allowing men to pretend to be women and then play on these women's teams. So I was in the room on Thursday morning when she presented that, and that was fantastic. I just wanted to play a quick clip of Representative Ehart on the Idaho Signal program. You can catch Idaho Signal daily, every weekday at 11:30 Mountain Time. Matt Edwards hosts and brings on legislators and activists, and I come on there for about 10 minutes each day to share what's going on behind the scenes at the Capitol. It's a great program. You don't need to turn on Channel 7 or whatever else you might want to watch. We'll bring you the information. I mean, you can. I'm not telling you can't, but I'm saying you have an alternative now to the corporate mainstream media. So here was Representative Ehart on Idaho Signal earlier this week.
If I could, I would like to just point something else out. Sometimes we as conservatives fall in this trap, and we need not to. But I was listening to the press interviewing, the person, I don't even know if it was a guy or gal, to be honest, I can't remember, that stood in opposition to this. And in the interview afterwards with the TV station, they happened to mention that we need to get to the important issues, that somehow this is important. And I've heard even conservatives do that in regards to various pieces of legislation, as though, what are we doing with this? We need to be dealing, quit wasting our time and get to the important issues. People, first off, this time of the year is a perfect time to do it. As far as wasting time goes, let me tell you, we're going to come in tomorrow at 8:30 so we can go up and down the order, and then we're going home. If it was a matter of time and we're wasting time, we would be there all day tomorrow taking care of business. But everything percolates at the speed it does, and these bills are barely being introduced and coming forward, and now's the perfect time to do it. There's no wasting anyone's time. And if it's something important to the people, then it's important. So I just thought that I'd kind of point that out, because it just frustrates me to no end to hear the other side say that. And it really does frustrate me every now and then when our side falls into that.
Yes, that is a great point. I am so glad you brought that up. We're going to snippet that part out and share it around for sure, because you're exactly right. I mean, it's like talking out both sides of your mouth. I mean, you guys aren't doing anything. You're doing a lot of meetings or a lot of this. You're going home early tomorrow. Like if things were important, we would have had 50 bills presented on day one. Like, get going. It's like, I mean, we expect to see that at the federal level when Trump gets in, right? Day one, the first 100 hours and all that stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, very good. Well, we know for a fact that if more legislators and more people out there had as steely a spine as you have, that we could sell them and make millions on Amazon ordering for everybody.
Yeah, I already bought my spine. No. I'm kidding.
Yeah, no. Very good. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, Representative Ehart. We're going to have you back throughout the year as well, hopefully. So have a great day and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate it, Matt.
All right, take care.
So yeah, that was that was great. Representative Ehart has done so much on this issue. I mean, a lot of legislators have pet issues, taxes or abortion or education, but protecting women's sports has been Barbara Ehart's prime issue. And she's traveled the country after getting our bill here in Idaho passed. She's traveled the country helping other state legislators pass it. She actually has connected with people like Riley Gaines, who is, has become an activist for this. She brought in Riley Gaines to speak at in the committee room yesterday. It was remotely, it was via Zoom. But still, she came in and was extremely well-spoken and very passionate about this issue. And it was great to see her speak and interact with the members of the committee on answering her questions. So, she's done great work on this. It's obviously not, the issue's not over, but I think the tide has turned. I think the tide has turned on the trans issue. 2 years ago, Idaho Freedom Foundation brought in Chloe Cole, a young woman who had transitioned to being a boy. Not that that's possible, but that's that was the identity, and then regretted it, and is back to living as a girl. But after a double mastectomy at the age of 15, her life's never going to be the same. And she's been speaking out about the epidemic of child gender transitions, which is barbaric. And she came here, and I believe it was her testimony that really helped push House Bill 71 over the finish line, which bans that sort of surgery and drugs here in Idaho. And she's been traveling the country getting that done elsewhere, with President Trump coming back into office in 9.5 days. I think we're going to see some federal action, even in the UK, United Kingdom, England, where they're as woke and left as possible, where their conservative party makes our Democrats look conservative. They still looked at it and said, wait a second, what are we doing to our children? And they stopped the whole process, which is something you can do when you have a national health system. That's one of the few advantages. But here, I think the tide is turning. People are seeing what we're doing to our children and how awful it is. They're seeing the insanity of men dressing up as women and playing, volleyball or swimming or boxing against actual women. And I think they're seeing it for the absurdity of that it is. And Representative Ehart used that word in her testimony on Thursday morning, absurdity. The person that she mentioned in the clip there who testified against the resolution, there was only one person who testified, and it was an individual known as Nixon Matthews, who is a transgender identifying individual who ran for state legislature last year, lost the Democratic primary to current Representative Todd Achilles. And Nixon came in and testified and said, trans women are women, and this is overblown, and you're making a mountain out of a molehill. And, Leah Thomas, Will Thomas, whoever you want to call him, is not actually that dominant. However, Riley Gaines pointed out that swimming as a man, Will Thomas was in the 400th to 500th ranking in the country among all college male swimmers. Once he started identifying as Leah Thomas and swimming with the girls, he's suddenly competing for championships. So it's not necessarily that he's going to win every event, but that he's definitely dominating. He's definitely taking spots away from the actual women who have worked hard for them. So even during that hearing, though, besides Nixon Matthews, the two Democrats on the committee, Representative Todd Achilles and Representative Brooke Green, they voted against the resolution and they debated against it, but they were very careful about how they did it. They made sure to couch their words in positive terms about the women's volleyball team at Boise State and how they want to believe them and how they want to support them. And they talked about how they're worried that this would further stigmatize and marginalize trans people. But I think even they see the tide is turning, that our country is starting to wake up to the absurdity of men pretending to be women and vice versa, and they're not going to take it anymore. This malady, this mental illness, which is really what it is, has become this dominant issue in our culture. And you'll hear people say that this is just a silly culture war issue. We need to get back to the kitchen table, bread and butter issues. But really, what is more important to a society than basic definitions like what is a man, what is a woman, what kind of differences do they have, what different spaces should they have within our society? That goes to the marriage debate, that goes to sports, it goes to what children are being taught in schools, it goes to what books are on the shelves in libraries. So it is an important debate, and it is absurd that we have to have it, but that's the battle we're faced with. And that's what we have to handle in our time that we are given to make a difference in our society. So thank you to Representative Ehart for being such a strong advocate on that. Thank you to Senator Grove for taking the time to speak with me today. I'll come back next Friday, with some more information, hopefully some more interviews, tell you what's going on. We're going to see a lot more bills here. I saw Representative Cornell Racer posted on his page. He's looking forward to a couple bills he's working on, including one, no welfare for illegals. I also heard there's a bill that would say that illegal aliens are not allowed to have firearms. And that's going to draw some debate because on the one hand, illegal aliens, they really don't have rights in our country. They're breaking the law just by their presence. On the other hand, you have a lot of folks who are absolutist on the Second Amendment, shall not infringe. The government doesn't have the right to take away guns from anybody. So that's going to be another interesting debate. And of course, school choice, we're going to get more details about that. We're going to start seeing budgets come in, tax cuts. I didn't even mention that today. Governor Little said he wants to give $100 million back to taxpayers. Speaker Mike Moyle said at least 3 times that. Representative Josh Tanner, my representative in 14, who's also the assistant majority leader, said he wants to see $400 million in taxes. He said he asked the governor's budget spokesperson, why do we have $100 million in tax relief and $400 in new spending? Why not reverse that? Yeah, that's a great question. So that's what's coming up. I will join you again next Friday. If you're in the Idaho Falls area, not tomorrow, but the Saturday after tomorrow, I'm going to be there to speak at an event in the evening. But I'll get there a little bit early, have some tea, have some lunch, and maybe meet some folks. So keep an eye out for more information about that. I hope you all have a great weekend. I appreciate you joining me here tonight. And remember, gemstatechronicle.com. I'll continue to keep you updated. News and analysis to help you make positive change, to help you